Welcome everyone to the 18th of hopefully many Degenesis lore drop videos. This time we are talking about the Fractal Forests and the Tsar. You might think that you already know everything there is to know about the Tsar after the last two videos on Vasco and the Mother of Ravens, but just you wait, there is much more. Thanks to all the new and old subscribers and commenters, especially for the input on my post about how to approach Clan Wars lore. So, the Degenesis board game Clan Wars is going live on GameFound soon. Check out the link in the description, and in the description you can also find links to many other Degenesis creators and also to my new SoundCloud page, where you can find all the Degenesis tracks I wrote over the last couple of years, and you can also download them there for free. And now, I hope you will enjoy this video. Like, comment, and subscribe for more. The fractal forests are an environmental phenomenon encountered in Pollen's wilderness. Some spore fields in the area have undergone a strange transformation. These fields begin to rot. Gaudy green vegetation spreads through the valleys, expands. Weeds sprout from the ground like hair. Trees rise up, their trunks still translucent and pale. Their roots snake across the ground, clutching the earth. Some branches are too heavy. They break and fall to the ground, melt and ooze away. Glassy leaves unfurl and turn toward the sun. Colors, from yellow and bright green to brown, pervade the plants. Trunks get denser, harden. Shades of green still waft over them at first, then they retain a dusty brown. The strange forests spread along fractal pathways. Viewed from above, they form branching spirals, whose branches create smaller spirals in turn. Others are star-shaped or circular, surrounded by other circles on all sides. All these fractal forests are centered in a former spore field. Now, nothing is left of it. The air smells of damp leaves and rotten fruit. The ground is warm to the touch. Haze hangs in the valleys. On the trees, blue-gray snails sit with elongated eye stalks that curl like tentacles. Within hours, a fractal forest is fully grown and starts hardening. Only a few days later, the trees bear fruit. Heavy, red, and tantalizing, they hang from the branches and smell delicious. The first of these strange forests was discovered by Spitalians in the middle of the tundra near Breslau in the year 2589. For the clanners of Pollen, however, these forests have played a significant role for their survival for decades, if not centuries. The fractal forests are mystical places full of wonders and danger. To the clans of Pollen, they mean everything. The clans adopt the forests, reap roots and bulbs, and warm themselves in hot springs found within the vegetation. They only light campfires at the edge of the fractal forests, as the weeds and shrubbery harden into crystalline thorns within seconds. All life drains from the roots and spreads into the surrounding vegetation. Only dry root strands and infertile ground remain. Fire at the heart of a fractal forest could make it collapse into a crystalline death trap. Whatever the clans take, they cook for hours. Even a sapling's life energy is perilous to anyone eating it uncooked. The clanners also know well to steer clear of the fractal forest's fruit. Those who approach them are caught in oppressive visions. When they rise from the mists, after hours or days, they tell of crushing masses of flesh, a fracturing of the mind, of entwinement and humid closeness. Some clans even report a change in the fractal forest once you have eaten of its fruit. New trees grow, others wither as the fruit's color changes. The forests treat the clans well, and they do likewise. Clanners free the trees from spiders, tear webs, dig up rift centipedes and crush them. They protect the forests against battalions or apocalyptics. However, sometimes a fractal forest demands more. The ground splits open and reveals the interior of a man-sized muscle sac made of white fleshy strands. Contraction waves ripple along the interior wall, making openings flutter. Yellowish digestive fluid sloshes in the deep, a phagocyte cusp. The clanners offer it rabbits and gendos, as well as blessed children, enemy warriors, or captured battalions. One day, the fractal forest's life energy is spent. Trees splinter, the fruits rot, the grass dissolves into bristly fibers. The clans thank the forest and move on. They do not notice how the countless phagocyte cusps they have fed throughout the seasons burst one by one. The rabbit jumps out unharmed, and the human sacrifices stagger to the surface, not having aged at all. They have, however, changed. Apart from the clanners of Pollen, different cults from the world of Degenesis have their own significant relationships to the fractal forests. In the year 2593, the Anabaptist emissary Wetzel the Chosen found a fractal forest close to the ruined city of Lodz. The Spitalians wanted to burn down the fractal forests, yet Wetzel thought differently about them. He stood in front of a tree, felt attracted by its fruit, touched the silken surface, and blurred the dew. What happened then is not fully recorded. Wetzel's notes are locked away in Cathedral City. Still, many Anabaptists now believe that the trees of the fractal forests are descendants of the Tree of Knowledge. Only the highest-ranking Baptists eat their fruit. Supposedly, consuming them creates deep, true revelations that drag many an Anabaptist separated from God into screaming madness. The chroniclers have a deep fascination for the fractal forests. The phagocyte cusps seem to be some sort of axis or interface point to the growth routines of the entire forest. Even the smallest modification to the phagocyte cusps changes the fractal growth patterns. Could the fractal forests be nothing more than giant biological computers? For the apocalyptics, the matter of the fractal forests is a more pragmatic one. Many profitable spore fields have rotten, and the burn harvest has taken a tumble. When they find a fractal forest, they burn it down. Apart from the apocalyptics, the fractal forests encounter another threat: the biokinetics and their minions. Rift centipedes and husk spiders follow their masters into war against the unholy vegetation, destroying their spore fields. The fact that the fractal forests find their biggest enemy in the raging biokinetics makes their origin even more peculiar. We know that the fractal forests are connected to a giant biokinetic organism living under pollen's surface, which is known as the Tsar. The origins of the Tsar are somewhat mysterious, but there are some clues that can be found in the paragraphs mentioning the superorganism that may lead us to uncovering some of the mysteries surrounding it. The Tsar is first mentioned in the Degenesis book Primal Punk, in a section that focuses on the effects that the so-called discordance phenomenon had on the biokinetics of pollen. Before the so-called discordance set in, the most powerful of pollen's biokinetics had grown up to become bony towers covered in thick flesh. Their arms and legs dug into the depth, down into the groundwater, even deeper into the continent's heat. From their pores, spiders were born that protected the trembling flesh against wind and rain with a thick net. Waves of psychonauts followed their chakra calls. Then something happened. From Hispania to the deepest Balkan, a jolt went through the psychonauts. The biokinetics screamed and thrashed, bleeding from their genitalia. Many burrowed into the ground, clutching glazed rock. Spurs broke, gnarled bulges sprouted from their whole bodies. The towers crumbled to the ground, moaning from meter-thick windpipes as their replete flesh withered and bone strands burst under their weight. The Spitalians later called this event the Discordance. The Psychonauts Chakra Collective of Europe had encountered the African Psychovores Collective. Shockwaves tore apart the links between the chakras and abandoned the Psychonauts in the ether's void. The first biokinetics never found their way back. They degenerated and still haunt pollen's tundra as mindless spore beasts. A new generation of biokinetics arose from the clans and linked with the spore fields. It all started anew. This loss of connection to the Psychonauts' respective chakras, which happened all over Europe, was the result of the European Psychonauts Chakra Collective encountering the African Psychovore Collective. A belt of contradictory evolution spread thousands of miles wide between the Psychonauts' sepsis invading from the north and the Psychovores pushing from the south. It is a widely held theory in the Degenesis community that the discordance phenomenon is the result of the incomplete 5-chakra collective of Europe trying to reach the 7th chakra of the Doroba in Africa. For more information on that topic, I refer you to my video about the primer. In fact, not all biokinetics perished during the discordance. Something had survived. Buried deep in the ground, a bloated cusp of pure life energy slumbered. The thick skin tube supplying it with nutritious ichor collapsed months ago. Interwoven with human DNA, protein molecules latched onto the being's genes and rewrote the program. Stem cells specialized into phagocytes or brain cells, only to revert to their genetic form shortly after. Calcium and other minerals fused to form teeth and bone cells. It was unstoppable. It is more or less confirmed by the story of Dr. Ernest Vasco that the surviving organism mentioned here is in fact the Tsar. Vasco is also the character, or rather the characters, connecting the Tsar and the fractal forests. For the full story of Vasco, I will refer you to my video about him, and give only a brief summary at this point. During an expedition into Pollen, Vasco's team was decimated while fighting a spore field, and was cursed to wander the wasteland of Pollen, bruised and starving. They encountered a fractal forest and got absorbed by the feeding cusps lurking underground. Vasco's DNA was absorbed by the organism beneath the forest, and weeks later, the Tsar produced a series of different iterations of Vasco that were sent out in search of the woman the Tsar considers to be its human mother, the mother of ravens. It seems to be reasonable to assume that there is some sort of connection between the discordance phenomenon and the appearance or the conception of the Tsar. The Tsar seems to have been the only biokinetic entity that survived the discordance phenomenon before the children of the Leperos from the clans of Pollen reclaimed the spore fields. As mentioned before in the paragraphs describing the impact of the discordance phenomenon on the biokinetics of Pollen, many of the psychonauts buried themselves into the ground, but perished nevertheless. There has to be something special about the Tsar that made it survive the catastrophe. In its primal stage, directly after the wave of discordance eradicated the other biokinetics, the Tsar is described as a bloated cusp of pure life energy, and there is also a mentioning of human DNA. Considering the fact that the Tsar believes its human mother to be the mother of ravens, a woman who has birthed many biokinetics over the centuries of her existence, it seems plausible that the Tsar used to be a biokinetic birthed by the mother of ravens, that has found its way into the wild, buried itself underground, and mysteriously survived the discordance phenomenon. This explanation, however, is kind of unsatisfying, but I will save conjecture about the reason for the Tsar's survival for the heavy spoiler part of this video. We do know that the Tsar showed a rather peculiar reaction to consuming the body and genetic material of Dr. Ernest Vasco. The reason for this, most probably, lies in the fact that Vasco himself was a carrier of the so-called pure strain, a special genetic sequence that all members of the Hive research group share. We also know that the pure strain is most probably somehow connected to the recombination group. You can find more information about the pure strain in my video about the marauder Gusev. Why the consumption of the pure strain sequence of Dr. Vosko caused the strange reaction in the Tsar of creating an array of Vosko clones is unknown, but here are some theories. The Tsar itself could be the offspring of a pure strain individual who conceived a child with a mother of ravens. It sure seems counterintuitive that the genetic sequence of a biokinetic would deserve the adjective pure, but since we do not know what exactly makes a pure strain DNA sequence so pure, and if it has anything to do with the absence of the primer, this theory could prove to be true, even though it might sound a little far-fetched. Of course, the Tsar could have been the lucky and lone biokinetic survivor of the discordance wave that did not turn into a spore beast. His survival a mere coincidence. Another question is if the discordance phenomenon triggered the Tsar to develop the way it did. If the influence of the discordance on the biokinetic entity led the organism to spread underground and ultimately create the fractal forests. The reason why I am somewhat fixated on the idea that the Tsar's existence might be the result of the combination of pure strain DNA and discordance may become clearer after we have looked at some peculiar similarities and parallels between Europe and Africa in relation to these topics. As mentioned before and in greater detail in my video about the primer, the discordance phenomenon can be described as the result of a failed connection between the different earth chakras of Europe and the African earth chakra. We know that the connection failed because the sixth chakra, hidden deep inside the Atlantic, had not yet bloomed. Inside the discordance zone, similar phenomenons to the Tsar can be found, with subterranean feeding cusps, swallowing living creatures and spitting out bizarre designs of evolution back into the world. Yet the fractal forests remain exclusive to pollen. Considering the fact that the discordance is a failed union of the European sepsis and the African psychovores, the similarities between the psychovores with their hexagonal leaf structures and their strange duat fruits, and the forests growing along fractal pathways, also spawning strange fruits, make the assumption that the Tsar is in fact an organism altered and shaped by discordance seem rather plausible. We do know that for the Anubian cult, the impending union of the now awakened chakras plays an extremely significant role. They are awaiting the completion of the synthesis of the earth chakras that failed and resulted in the discordance. And we also know that the pure strain DNA sequence also plays a role in their cult, and most probably also in their assumed final plan. The concept of bodily transformation and purifying can be found all over their cult, and there are several links between the Hive research group and the cult of Anubians. It seems like the Anubians are in search of a human vessel that could, once the earth chakras are all aligned, take the next evolutionary step. I will look into all these points in my video about Petrova and Homo Geantis. What the Anubians are searching for, the Discordants could have accidentally found in the Tsar. A vessel, a carrier of a new genetic sequence, born out of a distorted and incomplete union of the earth chakras of Europe with the African crown chakra. But this is pure conjecture, and there is one more piece of evidence that might contradict this theory entirely. During my Vasco video, I mentioned the short story, The Seed, in which an incarnation of Vasco meets with the Baptist Altair, a high-ranking member of the Anabaptist cult. During this encounter, the two men exchange two peculiar objects. Altair offers a sample of pure primer matter to Vasco and receives an amber stone containing a small seed which seems to have the power to repel the primer. While handing over the seed, Vasco murmurs the word Tsar. The iteration of Vasco tells Altair that the seed has to be brought to Cairo, and that the Anubians must never know of it. Also, the seed cannot cross the water alone, according to Vasco, because of the Discordant Zone. From the very first Degenesis adventure, In Thy Blood, we know that Altair never made it to Cairo, and that he probably did not intend to follow Vasco's instructions, since he actually gave away the amber stone containing the seed. The Anabaptist Verena received the seed as a gift, which is the reason why the biokinetic Barghest cannot harm her during the showdown of the adventure. From Verena's character description, we learn that if the seed was freed and planted into fertile soil, a fractal forest would start growing there. After the In Thy Blood adventure, Verena joins forces with the hunter Fernax to find out what she can about the strange amulet and the seed inside. From the epilogue of the Black Atlantic adventure, we learn that years later, the two reach Montpellier and are looking for an audience with the Neo-Libyan consul, Atuma, in order to get passage to Africa. Apparently, Vasco wanted to use the Tsar against the Psychowars, or maybe the Anubian cult as a whole. But still the question remains, what would happen if the seed were to pass through the Discordance Zone alone? With probably more questions raised than answered, I will end this video here and cry a single tear for every unreleased source book that would have given us more answers. Like the Africa source book or the Cathedral City one. But ultimately these tears will be dried by the burning sun of excitement that is the upcoming release of Clan Wars. Alright everyone, thank you very much for watching, thank you for subscribing, and please do comment if I made any stupid assumptions. If you find my theories very good or very stupid, do tell me, because as you heard, the Tsar is pretty mysterious and there is not a lot of information about him out there. And now, get very excited for Clan Wars, because it's coming in a couple of weeks. Yeah, check out the link in the description, do follow the GameFound, and yeah, then we will get so much more lore. I will start a little Clan Wars lore series soon, probably also write some music for that, and for Clan Wars maybe? Let's see. By the way, if you enjoy any of the sounds you just heard, music-wise, do check out my SoundCloud, and now people have a great one!